The war room aboard the Dominance hummed with an air of superiority, the polished obsidian floor reflecting the cold gleam of holographic displays. A circular table projected detailed simulations of past conquests, glowing in a menacing blue. The towering figure of General Kale Porath stood at the head, clad in armor adorned with etchings of past victories, his reptilian-like eyes gleaming with disdain. Around him, Urain officers watched with muted amusement as footage of Earth's primitive war machines played before them. Is this truly what humanity calls weaponry? Porath scoffed, his voice carrying a guttural edge. Metal tubes spitting solid projectiles? Artillery that relies on chemical combustion. He folded his arms, his mandibles clicking in mockery. We have crushed civilizations wielding planetary disintegrators, and these creatures still fire bullets? A murmur of laughter rippled through the ranks. Andy Jones stood slightly apart from the group, his expression unreadable. Unlike the others, he had spent more time studying humanity's warfare, its unpredictability, its sheer brutality. He had witnessed recordings of the Terran conflicts, battles that turned cities into hellscapes of fire and ruin. And yet, the Urain High Command dismissed such savagery as mere desperation. He did not share their amusement, but he held his tongue. Porath turned to the towering figure of the Urain Empire's overlord, who observed the discussion with a casual air. "Your Excellency, I propose a demonstration," Porath continued, his tone exuding arrogance. "Let us entertain ourselves. We shall stage a trial of combat, a show of dominance. Take a handful of their finest warriors, place them against our own. Let the galaxy witness the fragility of their species." The overlord, his dark carapace gleaming under the ethereal glow of the war room's lights, gave a slow, deliberate nod. "It would be amusing," he conceded. "And when they fall, Earth will know its place." The order was issued. The stage was set. Mike Warner, the notorious Baba Yaga, sat in darkness, the cold metal of his restraints biting into his wrists. His breathing was slow, steady. He had been here before, bound, trapped, surrounded. And yet, he was far from helpless. His mind was already at work assessing, counting steps, memorizing the rotation of the guards, listening. A door slid open with a hiss, and harsh light flooded the cell. 2 Urain soldiers entered, their imposing frames draped in ceremonial combat armor. They regarded him with something between curiosity and disgust. One of them gestured for him to rise. He did. The march through the corridors of Outpost Zenith 9 was silent, save for the mechanical hum of the station's life support systems. Through reinforced windows, the vast, swirling clouds of Jupiter loomed, an ominous backdrop to the events unfolding. Warner's mind worked through the situation. He had been taken 2 days prior, ambushed while leading a covert mission off-world. His team was either dead or captured. There had been no warning, no negotiations, only swift brutality. Now, he was being paraded through the heart of enemy territory. The doors ahead parted to reveal an open coliseum-like chamber. Tiered seating rose high above a battle-scarred arena floor. The stands were filled with alien spectators, officers, soldiers, aristocrats of the Empire, all gathered to witness what they believed would be a spectacle of humiliation. In the center of the arena, a group of other human captives stood, their expressions grim. Among them were 2 Special Forces operatives, their uniforms torn but their posture unbroken. Warner was forced forward, and the restraints were removed. The weight of a dozen Urain plasma rifles trained on him suggested escape was not yet an option. His gaze swept the Colosseum, taking in every vantage point, every potential weapon, every weakness. Then he turned his attention to the far side of the arena. A massive gate groaned open, and from within, 3 Urain gladiators emerged. They were towering monstrosities of bio-enhanced muscle and cybernetic augmentation, their exoskeletons reinforced with ablative plating. One carried a gravhammer that crackled with energy. Another wielded a plasma-forged spear, the last unarmed, flexed clawed hands capable of rending steel. The murmurs in the crowd turned to jeers, mocking laughter rolling through the chamber. General Porat's voice echoed from the observation deck above. Your so-called warriors will face true power today. Let this be a lesson in the futility of resistance. His gaze settled on Warner. And you, the fabled specter of death. Let us see if you are truly the legend humans whisper about, or if you will simply break like the rest. A deep, reverberating gong sounded. The battle had begun. The first Urain gladiator lunged, its spear thrusting forward with inhuman speed. Warner sidestepped, the plasma edge grazing past him with a searing hiss. Before his opponent could recover, he moved fluid, precise. He caught the Urain's arm, twisting it in a way joints were never meant to turn. A sickening pop echoed as the creature bellowed in pain. No time to celebrate. The second gladiator swung its grav hammer in a wide arc, the air around it distorting from the sheer force. Warner dropped low, the weapon missing him by inches, and in the same motion, he grabbed a discarded chunk of metal from the ground, likely debris from past fights, and drove it into the first gladiator's throat. The crowd's laughter faltered. The wounded Urain staggered back, clutching its ruined throat. Warner was already moving. He spun, his foot connecting with the second gladiator's knee. A solid crack. The beast stumbled. Another opening. He grabbed the fallen spear. Before his opponent could react, Warner drove the plasma weapon through the gladiator's skull, its body shuddering once before collapsing in a heap. Silence. Then roars of outrage. Porat's expression twisted into something unreadable, the amusement drained from his features. The final gladiator, now cautious, circled its prey. It charged. Warner anticipated the movement, feinting left before pivoting sharply. The Urain crashed forward, unable to stop its momentum. Warner seized the moment, wrapping a length of discarded chain around its throat and pulling with everything he had. The beast thrashed. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Porat's claws dug into the railing of his observation platform, his nostrils flaring. Below, Warner stood amidst the fallen giants, his breath even, his stance unshaken. The silence broke with the Overlord's slow, deliberate clap. Impressive, the ruler mused, his deep voice carrying through the chamber. Primitive but impressive, Porat's fury boiled just beneath the surface. This was not how it was supposed to go. He had promised an execution, a demonstration of Urain's superiority. And yet, this human had turned it into a display of defiance. Enough of this farce, the general snarled. He gestured to the guards. Kill him. Rifles were raised. Before the first shot could be fired, Warner dropped to the ground, grabbing the plasma spear. He moved faster than the guards expected, rolling into cover behind the fallen gladiator's body as a volley of plasma fire erupted around him. The fight was over, but the war had just begun. They had dragged him back to this cage, thrown him in like an animal. But he wasn't just waiting. He was thinking. He was planning. The Urain Empire had underestimated humanity, but arrogance alone wouldn't win him his freedom. He needed an opportunity. Then the power flickered. At first, it was a brief stutter in the lights, so slight it might have gone unnoticed. But Warner caught it. The hum of the station's systems wavered, a telltale sign of something wrong. The seconds stretched, the disruption lengthened. Then, just as abruptly, the lights snapped to a deep red, alarms blaring through the station. A breach. His head lifted slightly as he heard distant weapons fire. Not Urain plasma bursts. Human gunfire. The door to his cell hissed open. Standing in the threshold was a man clad in black combat armor, an assault rifle slung over his shoulder. The scar running along his left cheek caught the dim glow of emergency lights. His presence was unmistakable. Rogers. Warner's voice was low, but carried no surprise. Still breathing, I see. Captain Adrian Rogers took a step inside, his sharp gaze assessing Warner's condition. "They really did a number on you?" "They tried," Warner muttered. His restraints clattered to the floor as Rogers produced a combat knife and sliced through them in one clean motion. "No time for reunions," Rogers said. "We're on borrowed time." Warner flexed his wrists, rolling his shoulders, shaking off the stiffness. "How many?" "A 6-man infiltration team. We breached the outer docking bay under stealth protocols, made it to the prison block. Took down a few guards, but they're onto us now." Rogers tossed Warner a sidearm, a urane plasma pistol. "Not my first choice, but it'll do until we get you something better." Warner turned the weapon in his hands, weighing it. Alien tech was advanced, sure, but there was something impersonal about it. No kick, no weight. He preferred steel and lead. But for now it would do. The two of them moved through the corridors, pressing against walls as patrols rushed past, responding to alarms. Rogers led with practiced precision, his instincts honed from years of Black Ops missions behind enemy lines. Warner followed, silent and deadly. As they neared an intersection, a squad of Urane soldiers blocked their path, rifles raised. No time to think. Warner moved first. He fired twice, the blue-white plasma bolts taking the first guard in the chest. Rogers followed suit, dropping another. The remaining Urane howled in rage, lunging with a razor-sharp energy blade. But Warner sidestepped the charge, grabbed the alien's arm, and snapped it at the joint before driving the plasma pistol under its chin and pulling the trigger. The body hit the floor. Rogers exhaled, shaking his head. "Never gets old." Warner glanced at the dead guards. "They didn't expect us to fight like this. They don't expect us to win at all." They continued deeper into the station. Every step brought them closer to the heart of the outpost, the Urane armory. If they were going to survive, they needed real weapons. When they reached the vault doors, 2 other soldiers from Rogers' team were already waiting. One, Mason, had set up a portable hacking rig, fingers flying across the interface. The other, Keller, kept his rifle aimed down the corridor. "Tell me you're almost in," Rogers ordered. "Almost," Mason muttered. "These Urane systems are a nightmare. They don't have locks. They have biometric encryption with neural imprinting. I'm rewriting the system on the fly." "Faster," Mason grunted. "How about you tell their security to stop shooting at us?" As if on cue, an explosion rocked the corridor behind them. A Urane assault team had caught up. Plasma fire erupted in brilliant streaks, forcing them into cover. Keller returned fire, but their position was worsening. Warner took a deep breath, eyes scanning the battlefield. The vault door was still locked, their enemies pressing in. They needed a shift. Then he saw it. A loose plasma coil, a crucial power source for the Urane security turrets, embedded in the wall. Warner moved without hesitation, darting from cover and sliding beneath incoming fire. He ripped the coil free and hurled it into the oncoming squad. The moment it hit the floor, he fired a single shot into it. The resulting explosion was devastating. The corridor filled with fire and shrapnel, alien bodies flung against the walls. The smoke barely cleared when Mason shouted, "We're in." The vault door slid open, revealing a cache of confiscated human weaponry. Warner stepped inside, and for the first time in days, he felt something akin to relief. Lined up in pristine condition were the weapons the Yarans had mocked. A M134 minigun, barrels polished, ready to roar. An M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun, belt-fed devastation. Several M240B machine guns, alongside stacks of armor-piercing ammunition. And in the center, resting on a pedestal like a forgotten relic, lay something special. Warner's fingers curled around the grip of a custom M4A1 with an underslung grenade launcher. He tested its weight, chambered around, then turned to the others. "This is more like it." Rogers grinned. "They thought they were collecting antiques. They have no idea what's coming." The alarms shifted, a deeper klaxon signaling full lockdown. The Yarans knew something was wrong. "Move," Warner ordered. They rushed back through the corridors, now armed to the teeth. Warner took point, the minigun whirring to life in his hands. The moment a squad of Urane enforcers appeared, he squeezed the trigger. A deafening roar of bullets filled the station, cutting through the so-called invincible armor of the alien warriors. The .50 caliber rounds shredded everything in their path, tearing through walls, bodies, and egos. The Yarans, so confident in their technological superiority, had never encountered sheer firepower like this. By the time Warner and his team reached the hangar, the floor was littered with the broken bodies of their enemies. Their escape ship awaited, but blocking their path stood a Urane warlord, a towering brute clad in heavy exo-armor. He wielded a plasma hammer, its energy crackling. Warner didn't stop walking, didn't hesitate. The minigun whined as its barrels spun faster. The Urane took a step forward, then Warner opened fire. The rounds tore into the warlord, blasting through armor and flesh, sending the alien crashing to its knees before collapsing into a lifeless heap. Rogers exhaled. "Remind me never to piss you off." Noted. With the hangar clear, they boarded the stealth ship and lifted off, leaving the station in ruins. As they ascended into the darkness of space, Warner looked back once at the empire that had laughed at humanity. They weren't laughing anymore. The war had begun. The sky over Earth burned. Urane warships descended through the stratosphere, their sleek, angular hulls blotting out the sun as they released waves of drop pods. The atmosphere crackled with plasma fire, bolts of searing energy raining down on cities already drowning in chaos. Civilization teetered on the brink. The once bustling streets of New Washington, now a battlefield of smoldering wreckage and desperate last stands. Mike Warner stood atop a half-crumbled overpass, the M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun mounted at his side, its barrel still smoking from the last wave of invaders. Sweat and dust clung to his skin, but his grip was steady. Below, the remnants of the United Earth Defense Force, UEDF, scrambled to fortify their position. Engineers setting up barricades, soldiers distributing ammunition, medics dragging wounded men into cover. Across the comms, Captain Adrian Rogers' voice crackled through the static. "We just lost our west perimeter. More landers coming in fast." Warner surveyed the ruined landscape. Beyond the collapsed buildings and overturned vehicles, Urane shock troopers advanced in tight formations, their energy shields flickering under incoming fire. For all the damage humanity had inflicted so far, the Empire's forces were unrelenting, adapting, closing the gap with brutal efficiency. "Then we stopped them here," Warner replied, shifting his stance. "This is our last line." Rogers exhaled sharply. "You got a plan?" Warner chambered around in his M4A1, ice cold. "Same plan as always." He heard the war horns before he saw them, a deep, bone-rattling sound that rolled across the battlefield like the promise of death itself. Then they charged. The Urane assault began with a hail of plasma mortars, streaks of blue energy crashing into human defenses, sending dirt and fire into the air. The shock troopers followed, their massive forms moving with terrifying speed, their plasma rifles burning holes through cover. Warner ducked behind a ruined transport vehicle, returning fire in short, controlled bursts. Each shot found its mark: headshots, throat strikes, armor gaps, but the enemy pressed on undeterred. To his left, a UEDF heavy gunner was vaporized by a well-placed plasma shot. To his right, a grenadier barely had time to pull the pin before a Urane blade cut him down. The line was collapsing. Warner reached over, yanked the M2 Browning's charging handle, and let loose. The machine gun thundered, a relentless storm of lead tearing through the enemy ranks. Urane bodies convulsed under the sheer force, their once superior armor crumpling as .50 caliber rounds punched through. The ground became a graveyard of broken exoskeletons, but still they came. A Urane warbeast, towering at nearly 4 meters tall, barreled through the wreckage, its plasma glaive carving through human troops like they were made of paper. Warner turned the Browning, squeezed the trigger and held it down. Rounds chewed through flesh, bones, cybernetics, until the beast finally collapsed, black ichor pooling beneath it. A fresh explosion rocked the area as a Urain Graf tank hovered over the ruins, its cannon charging. Warner grabbed an M72 Law rocket launcher, pulled the safety pin, and fired. The rocket streaked forward, detonating against the tank's hull. It buckled, flames erupting from its core before it spiraled and crashed into the rubble. For a fleeting moment, Warner allowed himself a breath. Then he saw the drop pods. From above, dozens of Urain elites descended, warriors clad in obsidian armor, carrying weapons designed to incinerate flesh on contact. The Empire was no longer toying with them. This was the kill shot. Warner heard Rogers through the comms, his voice tight with urgency. "Mike, we need to fall back. They're bringing in a dreadnought." He turned his gaze skyward, past the smoke and fire, where something colossal loomed above Earth's surface. The Urain dreadnought, Sovereign Wrath. It was more than a warship. It was a city-sized executioner, a planetary siege engine that had reduced entire civilizations to smoldering ruins in mere hours. If it deployed its orbital plasma cannon, Earth was finished. Warner reloaded his M4A1, jaw set. Not happening. A Urain elite lunged toward him, plasma blade humming. Warner sidestepped, grabbed its wrist, snapped it with one sharp twist, then shoved his combat knife up through its throat. Another charged. He emptied half a magazine into its chest before switching to his minigun and annihilating the rest. Rogers' voice returned. "We've got one shot at this." Warner nodded, already anticipating the plan. They needed to take down the dreadnought. UEDF still had one functioning railgun battery, located just outside the ruins of New Washington. The problem? The Yarans knew it too. If they wanted to destroy the dreadnought before it fired, someone had to hold the line long enough for the weapon to charge. Warner looked at the battlefield, at the men who still stood despite the hell raining down around them. "You take the railgun," he told Rogers. "I'll keep them busy." Rogers hesitated. "Mike, that's a suicide mission." Warner wiped blood from his face, expression unreadable. "Wouldn't be my first." There was no time to argue. Rogers barked orders over comms, rallying the remaining UEDF forces toward the railgun facility. Warner stayed behind with a small handful of soldiers, the last stand. They took position among the wreckage, bodies pressed to ruined walls, fingers gripping triggers. Then the final wave came. The ground trembled as the Urain onslaught rushed forward. Plasma beams cut through the air. Grenades detonated. Screams filled the battlefield. Warner fired until his rifle clicked empty, then switched to his sidearm. Every shot counted, every second stolen a victory. His men fell around him, one by one, but they held. Then, above, a brilliant pillar of light erupted from the railgun battery. The shockwave tore through the clouds, streaking toward the Sovereign Wrath like divine judgment. The dreadnought attempted to raise shields, but it was too late. The railgun round punched through the warship's core, an explosion of catastrophic magnitude engulfing its frame. The shockwave ripped through the Urain fleet, their formations breaking, retreating, the once invincible empire now fractured, leaderless. On the ground, Warner exhaled, his body battered, his ammo gone. The battlefield had gone eerily silent. Rogers' voice crackled through the comms, disbelief lacing his tone. "We did it." Warner looked at the wreckage, at the retreating Urain forces, and, for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself a ghost of a smile. "We're not done yet," because they both knew the truth. The Urain Empire wouldn't forget this day, and neither would he. The battlefield was an ocean of fire and ruin. Smoldering husks of Urain warships dotted the horizon, their shattered remains half buried in the ruins of New Washington. The once pristine streets were now a graveyard of steel and flesh, human and alien bodies alike strewn across the wreckage. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burning ozone, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. The sky was darkened by the falling debris of the Sovereign Wrath, the destroyed Urane dreadnought whose wreckage still rained down in slow, fiery arcs. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Mike Warner stood at the heart of it all, bloodied but unbowed, his M4A1 resting against his shoulder as he scanned the battlefield. His ammo reserves were dwindling. His muscles ached, torn and bruised from the relentless combat. But his mind was sharp, his purpose unwavering. He wasn't done killing. Through the smoke and ruin, the remaining Urane forces had begun their retreat, their once unbreakable formations shattered, their will to fight fractured beyond repair. The soldiers that remained fought not with arrogance, but with something almost alien to them, fear. And then the war horns sounded again. A deep, guttural roar rolled across the ruined city, vibrating through the broken streets, through the bones of the men who still stood. It wasn't a retreat signal. It was something else. A declaration. Warner turned. A massive Urane warship loomed above the wreckage, its crimson hull cracked, but still intact. From its underbelly, a single drop pod detached, descending with terrifying speed. Unlike the mass-produced pods that had deployed the countless troops before, this one was different. Larger, armored, a symbol. Warner exhaled, adjusting his grip. This was it. The pod slammed into the ground, sending a tremor through the city. The earth cracked beneath it. Steam hissed from its release valves, and the outer plating peeled away like the exoskeleton of some ancient beast. A figure stepped forward. General Kale Porath, the Urane High Warlord, the architect of this invasion, the executioner of 100 conquered worlds. His obsidian armor gleamed beneath the dying embers of the sky, runic inscriptions of past victories etched across its plating. His plasma-forged warblade pulsed with energy, its crackling hum sending sparks into the air. His stance was unshaken, his expression unreadable. Warner met his gaze without flinching. Porath descended the ruins slowly, deliberately. Behind him, what remained of the Urane forces gathered, watching in reverence. They knew what this was. They knew what their leader demanded. A duel. No armies. No fleets. No distractions. One warrior against another. Roger's voice crackled over Warner's comms. "Mike, we have them on the run. We don't need this fight. Pull back." Warner kept his eyes on Porath, his heartbeat steady. "I do." The warlord's voice was a low, gravel-like growl, amplified through his armor's vocal filters. "You are an anomaly, human." His clawed fingers tightened around his warblade. "No species has stood before the might of the Urane Empire as you have." He tilted his head, his slitted eyes narrowing. "Tell me, what are you?" Warner's fingers brushed over the grip of his M4A1, the weight familiar. "I'm the last thing you see." Porath's mandibles flared. He charged. Warner moved, rolling to the side as the plasma blade carved through the air, slicing clean through the remains of a transport vehicle. Sparks flew as the weapon cut through steel like it was paper. Warner came up firing. 3 rounds, center mass. The bullet struck, but Porath barely staggered, his armor absorbing the impact. He turned, lightning fast, and slashed. Warner barely avoided the strike, but the heat of the blade seared across his shoulder, burning through his tactical vest and grazing flesh. He grit his teeth against the pain, shifting his grip. This wasn't a fight against an ordinary soldier. Porath was faster, stronger, his reflexes sharpened by centuries of warfare. But Warner had fought gods before. He ducked under another swing, drawing his combat knife, and plunged it into Porath's side, just beneath the armor plating. The Urane let out a guttural snarl, lashing out with unnatural speed. His fist connected with Warner's ribs, sending him sprawling backward. Pain exploded through his chest, something cracking under the impact. Warner hit the ground hard, his vision flashing white for a moment. He rolled just as the warblade came down, splitting the concrete where his skull had been moments before. He came up coughing, his body protesting, but he ignored it. Pain didn't matter. Not now. Porath stepped forward, slow and deliberate. I expected more. Warner wiped blood from his mouth. Give it a second. He reached down. His hand closed around the grip of the M134 minigun. Porath saw the movement and lunged, but Warner was already firing. The roar of the minigun drowned out the battlefield, a hurricane of lead unleashed at point-blank range. Porath staggered. His armor buckled, bullets tearing through its plating, splintering the runes of his past victories. Blood splattered against the ruins, thick and dark. The warlord snarled in pain, but still he advanced, the plasma blade humming with raw energy. Warner kept firing. Rounds tore through his shoulder, his leg, his gut. Porath's steps faltered. The minigun clicked empty. The warlord swayed, his massive frame barely holding itself up. His war blade flickered, the energy surging weakly before sputtering out. He fell to his knees. Warner walked forward, his own body screaming in protest, but his steps never wavering. Porath lifted his gaze, blood leaking from his mandibles. His breath was ragged, but his eyes still burned with defiance. He struggled for breath. You fight like a beast. Without honor. Warner drew his M1911 pistol, chambered the final round, and placed it against Porath's forehead. He looked him in the eye. You shouldn't have mocked us. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the ruins, and the warlord's body crumpled. Silence fell over the battlefield. The remaining Urain forces stared in stunned disbelief. Their leader, their warlord, their symbol of dominance, was dead at the hands of a human. The war was over. The Yarans broke rank and fled, their arrogance shattered, their spirit broken. Warner stood there for a long moment, watching them disappear into the smoke. His body ached, his breath came slow, but he didn't fall. Not yet. Roger's voice finally came through the comms, quiet. Holy shit. Warner turned away from the corpse, reloading his pistol with deliberate care. Let's go home. In the distance, the remnants of humanity's army stood victorious, battered but unyielding. The sky, once burning with the fires of war, began to clear. The Urain Empire had come with the promise of annihilation. Instead, they had learned fear, and Mike Warner had delivered it to them, one bullet at a time.